In my ranking of the Harry Potter books, Half-Blood Prince is bang in the middle. As the second to last book in the series, it sets up the final act really nicely while also giving us a lot of information on certain characters and establishing connections and parallels that will pay off in Deathly Hallows. It's also, of course, where we see the culmination of Harry's love life. So that's why, while some of the other books get the edge on this one due to their characters and emotional impact, or just keeping me on the edge of my seat, this one still sits comfortably in the middle of the pack for me. The movie, however, is either my least or second least favorite. I just don't think the filmmakers had the right priorities in terms of what to focus on. They severely cut down on what is probably the most important and interesting part, which is learning about Voldemort's past, and the actual Half-Blood Prince subplot is just reduced to a couple scenes, and has little to no impact on the story or characters. They pushed these things to the background and brought the romantic drama to the forefront, which, while prominent in the book, never overshadowed the more important things. Also, is it just me or does this movie have a distinct lack of color, visually speaking? A lot of dark, damp greens and browns. So yeah, that's the main gist of my problems with this movie. Let's get into more detail, shall we? Now, unlike in the other videos, I'm not going to start at the beginning of the book. As I mentioned, the most important thing cut from this movie was Voldemort's backstory, so I'm going to start by going over all of that. We learn about it in bits and pieces throughout the book, as Dumbledore shows memories to Harry, but I figured I might as well cover it all at once, and the start of the video seemed like the best place. Voldemort's story starts with his parents, in particular his mother, Merope Gaunt. Merope lived with her father Marvolo Gaunt and her brother Morphin Gaunt. Thanks to generations of inbreeding, the Gaunt family, the last descendants of Salazar Slytherin, were very mentally unstable and violent. It also didn't help that the family fortune had been spent several generations earlier, leaving them in poverty. All they had left of value were a locket that had belonged to Slytherin himself, and a ring with the Peveril coat of arms on it, both of which would later be made into Horcruxes by Voldemort. Merope was often abused both mentally and physically by her father and brother, mainly because of her seeming lack of magical talent, though as it turned out, said lack of magic was largely because of her father and brother's abuse. She was also forced to cook and clean for them. Merope had a crush on a handsome and rich muggle named Tom Riddle, who she liked to watch as he rode through the village, but who didn't even know she existed, and who was incredibly snobby and hated magic. One day, Morphin noticed his sister watching Riddle, and so he hit Riddle with a spell that caused him to erupt in painful hives. The Ministry of Magic took care of it, curing Riddle and wiping his memory, and sent a representative named Bob Ogden to the Gaunt house to summon Morphin to the Ministry so he could stand trial for what he'd done. Ogden and Marvolo Gaunt got into a heated argument, or rather Marvolo kept yelling at Ogden, believing his family lineage should excuse them from anything, and made him superior to all others. He was disgusted by Ogden's complete lack of care about blood purity. During the confrontation, they heard Tom Riddle pass by the house with a girlfriend, and Morphin gleefully informed his father about Merope's crush on him. Marvolo, of course, was enraged that his pure-blooded daughter, descended from Salazar Slytherin, would have eyes for a muggle, and Ogden was forced to jinx him just to stop him from strangling her. This caused Morphin to attack Ogden, who fled and returned with reinforcements from the Ministry. Marvolo and Morphin put up a fight, but were overpowered and arrested. Marvolo was sentenced to 6 months in Azkaban, while Morphin, who already had a criminal record, received 3 years. So with her father and brother in prison, Merope was finally free, and since she was no longer being constantly abused, she was finally able to develop her magical powers. Desperately wanting Tom Riddle to notice her, she brewed a love potion and tricked him into drinking it. The two of them ran off together, causing a huge scandal in the village. When Marvolo returned from Azkaban after 6 months, he was shocked to find her gone, and since he had always relied on her to feed him, he died shortly afterwards. Within a few months of their runaway marriage, Merope became pregnant with Tom Riddle's baby. Merope started to feel guilty about enslaving her husband with a love potion and stopped feeding it to him, hoping that he would have come to genuinely love her by that point, or that he would at least stay for their baby's sake. She was wrong. He left her, returned home, and never even bothered to learn what had happened to his son. It's pretty heavily implied that being conceived under the influence of a love potion contributed to Voldemort's sociopathic personality and inability to feel love. Merope was heartbroken after Riddle left her, and whether by choice or because the heartbreak and despair rendered her unable to, she never used magic again after that. Alone and desperate for money, she sold the Slytherin locket, which she had taken from the Gaunt House, to Caractacus Burke, one of the founders of Borgin and Burkes, who completely ripped her off, only giving her 10 galleons for the locket, which was worth a hell of a lot more. Merope later arrived at a functioning but very grim orphanage where she gave birth to her son within an hour. She lived just long enough afterwards to give him his name, Tom Marvolo Riddle, and then she died. So Tom Riddle Jr. grew up in the orphanage. According to Mrs. Cole, the woman who ran it, he was a very weird kid. Even as a baby, he hardly ever cried. And as he grew up, there were strange incidents involving the other children. He had one boy's rabbit hang itself from the rafters after the two of them argued. On a summer outing, he took 2 other kids into a cave, and they were never quite right afterwards. He also liked to collect trophies from the kids he terrorized. One day, when Tom was 10, he was visited by Albus Dumbledore, who had come to offer him a place at Hogwarts. This part was shown in the movie. By the way, this is actually Ralph Fiennes' nephew playing him. Tom was initially suspicious of Dumbledore, thinking he was a doctor come to take him to an asylum, and straight up ordered him to tell the truth. Tell the truth! He spoke the last 3 words with a ringing force that was almost shocking. It was a command, and it sounded as though he had given it many times before. When Dumbledore explained to him that Hogwarts was a school of magic, however, Tom believed him instantly, quite willing to believe he was special.
I can make things move without touching them. I can make animals do what I want without training them. I can make bad things happen to people who are mean to me. I can make them hurt. If I want.
Still, he ordered Dumbledore to prove it, though Dumbledore only did so once Tom asked him politely. Tom insisted on going alone to buy his school supplies, only asking Dumbledore how to get to Diagon Alley. When Dumbledore mentioned the name of Tom the barman, Riddle gave an angry twitch. He hated the fact that someone shared his name. Even then, he wanted to be independent and unique. Riddle immediately developed blood supremacist ideals, assuming his mother couldn't possibly have been a witch if she had died, and that he must have gotten it from his father. As Dumbledore started to leave, Riddle told him about his ability to talk to snakes, hoping to shock and impress him. Following this meeting, however, Riddle would become very wary of Dumbledore, fearing that he had told him too much. So Riddle bought all of his school stuff and arrived at Hogwarts, being sorted into Slytherin the second the hat touched his head. He was able to conceal his true nature very well, displaying no outward signs of arrogance or aggression, and all of the teachers liked and sympathized with him. All except for Dumbledore, who was already slightly suspicious of him after their meeting, and made sure to keep an eye on him. Riddle knew better than to push his luck around Dumbledore, so he never tried to turn on the charm with him like he did with his colleagues. During his years at Hogwarts, Riddle gathered around him a group of friends, or rather followers, because he didn't really care about any of them, many of whom would become the first Death Eaters after leaving Hogwarts. They committed several nasty crimes during their 7 years, none of which were tied back to them. These included, of course, the opening of the Chamber of Secrets and the killing of the girl who would become Moaning Myrtle, something he framed Hagrid for. Riddle was obsessed with learning about his parentage and searched Hogwarts desperately for any sign of his father. When he was unable to find any, he was forced to accept that his father must have been a muggle. This was when he decided to change his name. No longer would he be Tom Riddle. He would be Lord Voldemort. Not publicly, of course, for now it would only be his close followers who would call him that. He then started looking into his mother's family. All he had to go on was his middle name, Marvolo, which he had been told was his grandfather's name. From there, he learned about the Gaunt family and his blood relation to Salazar Slytherin. In the summer following his 5th year at Hogwarts, he traveled to the Gaunt's house, where he met his mother's brother, Morphin. Morphin initially thought he was Tom Riddle Sr. and lunged at him, but Riddle, or rather Voldemort, calmed him down by speaking Parseltongue to him. Voldemort learned from Morphin about his mother's affair with the rich muggle who lived with his parents in a nearby house, that said muggle ditched her and returned to the house, and that his mother stole Slytherin's locket when she left. After learning all of this, Voldemort knocked Morphin out with a spell, took his wand, went to the Riddle house, and used Morphin's wand to kill his father and grandparents. He then returned to the Gaunt house, placed Morphin's wand back next to him, took the Gaunt family ring from him, and magically implanted a false memory into him that made him believe he himself had committed the murders. So when the Ministry came to investigate the murders, not only did they find Morphin's wand to have cast the killing curse on those muggles, but Morphin himself proudly confessed to the crime. And since Morphin already had a long record of violence towards muggles, no one bothered to dig any deeper. He was taken to Azkaban, where he would soon die. During his 6th year at Hogwarts, Voldemort learned about Horcruxes, objects in which a wizard can store part of their soul, and asked the teacher he was closest with, Professor Slughorn, about them, putting on a very convincing performance to make Slughorn believe he was only interested in them for academic purposes. He learned from Slughorn that a wizard splits their soul by killing someone, and that they can then place a part of that split soul in another object, so that if the wizard's body is destroyed, they still won't die. From this point on, Voldemort became obsessed with the idea of Horcruxes and decided they would be the perfect tool for his quest to conquer death. He decided that 7 soul fragments, 6 Horcruxes plus the piece in his body, would be the right amount, as the number 7 is considered to be the most powerfully magical number in the wizarding world. As a matter of fact, the number 7 comes up a lot throughout the story. 7 years at Hogwarts, 7 players on a Quidditch team, 7 Weasley children, 7 obstacles protecting the Philosopher's Stone, 7 books, and those are just a few of them. Voldemort used Myrtle's death to split his soul and place part of it into his diary, making his first Horcrux. He also, of course, intended for the diary to be used years later to open the Chamber of Secrets again. He used the Gaunt family ring he had stolen from Morphin as his second Horcrux, and used his father's death to split his soul into that one. Also, though we don't learn about this until Deathly Hallows, he spoke with the Grey Lady, the Ravenclaw ghost, and used his charm to convince her to tell him where she had hidden her diadem. After graduating, Voldemort asked the headmaster, Armando Dippet, whether he could stay at Hogwarts as a teacher. In particular, he wished to teach Defense Against the Dark Arts. It would be a useful position he could use to influence young children. However, Dippet told him he was too young, but was welcome to reapply in a few years. So ignoring advice and recommendations from his teachers, Voldemort went to work at Borgin and Burke's, obviously hoping to find dark artifacts he could turn into Horcruxes. Because of his ability to charm people, he was often sent by the owners to persuade people to sell their treasures to him, and was very gifted at this. One of the people he visited was a very rich witch named Hepzibah Smith, who claimed to be a descendant of Helga Hufflepuff. No wonder Zacharias Smith is so snobby. After a few visits, Voldemort persuaded her to show him her 2 most valuable possessions. A gold cup that belonged to Helga Hufflepuff, which was a family heirloom, and a gold locket that belonged to Salazar Slytherin, the very one Merope had sold to Borgin and Burke's a few years ago. Apparently they sold it to Hepzibah. Deciding both objects would make great Horcruxes, Voldemort poisoned Hepzibah Smith and stole them. He framed Hepzibah's house elf Hoki in a very similar way to how he framed Morphin for the Riddle's murder. He planted a fake memory in her that made her think that, due to her old age and slipping mental health, she had accidentally put poison in her mistress's cup. Following this, Voldemort left Borgin and Burke's and disappeared for about 10 years. During this time, he used Hepzibah Smith's death to make his 3rd Horcrux in Hufflepuff's cup, and he killed a Muggle tramp to make his 4th in Slytherin's locket. He also tracked down Ravenclaw's diadem in Albania, where the Grey Lady had told him she put it, and made that his 5th Horcrux after killing an Albanian peasant. So that's 5 out of 6. And each time he split his soul, his appearance became less and less human. He then hid each Horcrux in secret locations and placed magical protection around each of them, except for the diary, which he gave to Lucius Malfoy so it could be used to open the Chamber of Secrets again. He didn't tell Lucius exactly what it was, of course. So after 10 years, Voldemort returned to Hogwarts to request of Dumbledore, who was now headmaster, that he be given the job of Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Not only did Dumbledore refuse to give it to him, but he refused to allow Voldemort to set the terms of the meeting by insisting on calling him Tom rather than his preferred name. He also seemed to know a surprising amount about what Voldemort had been doing the past 10 years, and he even knew the names of several of his Death Eaters. Dumbledore refused to give him the job, and Voldemort left the castle, though as we later learn in Deathly Hallows, not before hiding the diadem in the Room of Requirement. From there, Voldemort started his reign of terror, which lasted for many years until he learned of the prophecy and went to kill Harry, where he met his downfall. Incidentally, he had planned to use Harry's death to make his sixth and final Horcrux. Unbeknownst to him, of course, he unintentionally turned Harry himself into a Horcrux here. So yeah, we learn a lot about Voldemort's past in the book, but nearly all of it is completely cut from the movie, which I think was a big mistake. This is one of the most important parts, not just of this book, but of the entire series. Harry is of course the main character, so focusing on his journey makes sense, but Voldemort's story, knowing where he comes from and what makes him tick, is almost equally as important. In fact, even though Ron and Hermione appear much more than them, I would say the two most important characters in the series, aside from Harry, are Voldemort and Dumbledore. I feel like the movies lose sight of this, so they cut down on both characters' backstories in favor of showing more of the romantic drama between Ron and Hermione. In doing so, however, I feel like they kind of do a disservice to all four characters. Ron and Hermione are great, but they don't need this extra focus. We do, however, need to see the backstory of our biggest villain for the story to have the proper impact. But let's move on from that now and get to the actual start of the book. The book actually opens on a scene with the Muggle Prime Minister being visited by Cornelius Fudge, who informs him of the current goings-on in the wizarding world. It's interesting to see the relationship between the Ministry of Magic and the Muggle government. Apparently, every time a new Prime Minister is elected, the Minister of Magic appears and tells them about the wizarding world, usually to their horror. For the most part, the Prime Minister will be left alone after that, but if anything big happens that would affect the Muggle world, the Minister of Magic will return to inform them. And for this poor Prime Minister, that's happened a lot, as Fudge has visited him several times, telling him about Voldemort, about Sirius Black escaping Azkaban, about the attack on the Quidditch World Cup, about the dragons and Sphinx being imported for the Triwizard Tournament, and about the mass breakout from Azkaban earlier this year. It also doesn't exactly help that the Minister of Magic he has to deal with is Fudge, who tends to talk to him as if he were an ignorant teenager, and will often leave before the Prime Minister can ask any questions about things. On this particular visit, Fudge informs the Prime Minister that Voldemort is back, that the Dementors of Azkaban have joined him, and that he and his followers have been responsible for several of the disasters that the Prime Minister's government have been blamed for by his political opponents. These include what appeared to be a hurricane but was in fact Death Eaters, likely with the help of giants, destroying a county, a pair of murders that the Muggles could never solve, those of Order of the Phoenix member Emmeline Vance and head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement Amelia Bones, who we briefly met back at Harry's hearing. There was also the mysterious destruction of the Brockdale Bridge, which caused the deaths of countless Muggles. According to Fudge, this happened because Voldemort had threatened a mass Muggle killing unless he stepped down and allowed Voldemort a free rein to do whatever he wanted. Fudge refused, so Voldemort had that bridge destroyed and killed all those Muggles. As much as Fudge sucks, though, I can't really blame him for that decision. Like, what was he supposed to do? Now, while we do see a bit of the dynamics between the Muggle and magical governments, the main purpose of this scene is to bring us, the readers, up to date on what's been happening since the end of Order of the Phoenix, and I think it was handled in a clever way. In fact, I think you can see how Rowling's skill in writing exposition has improved over the course of the series. Compare this scene to the conversation between Dumbledore and McGonagall in Chapter 1 of Philosopher's Stone. That was another exposition scene, but it felt more awkward because the two characters are discussing things that they both already know, clearly for the benefit of us, the readers. Having Fudge explain to the Prime Minister what's been happening is a much more natural way to deliver exposition, because we have one character explaining things to another character who wouldn't know about them, and in doing so, filling us in on current events as well. I just think it's kind of cool to see how Rowling's writing skill has evolved over the course of the series. Now, the filmmakers didn't include this scene in the movie, and I don't blame them. In fact, I like what they did in taking advantage of the visual medium to actually show us the bridge being destroyed by the Death Eaters, as well as Ollivander being kidnapped. Just from these things alone, we get a good idea of how dark and dangerous times have gotten for both wizards and Muggles. That said, there is one part of this scene in the book that I do wish the movie hadn't cut. Namely, we learn that Fudge has been sacked. He's no longer Minister of Magic. Apparently, after the destruction of the bridge, people have been clamoring for his resignation. All we get about this in the movie is a brief glimpse of a news headline reading, "New Minister Promises Swift Action." Speaking of which, Fudge introduces the Prime Minister to his successor, Rufus Scrimgeour, a character who was cut from the movie altogether and only introduced in the next one, right before he's killed. But regardless, this is where we meet Rufus Scrimgeour in the books. He doesn't come across as particularly friendly, but it's clear that this guy is taking his job seriously and is more capable and willing to take action than Fudge. There was an immediate impression of shrewdness and toughness. The Prime Minister thought he understood why the wizarding community preferred Scrimgeour to Fudge as a leader in these dangerous times. Scrimgeour clearly isn't one for pleasantries or small talk. He gets right down to business, discussing the Prime Minister's security. He tells him that his new secretary, Kingsley Shacklebolt, is actually an Auror assigned to him for his protection, and that his junior minister, who had recently started behaving very oddly, had been placed under the Imperious Curse, evidently by dark wizards hoping to get to him. There is a rather amusing moment at the end of the chapter as Scrimgeour and Fudge make to leave, and the Prime Minister blurts out, "But for heaven's sake, you're wizards! You can do magic! Surely you can sort out, well, anything!" Scrimgeour turned slowly on the spot and exchanged an incredulous look with Fudge, who really did manage to smile this time as he said kindly, "The trouble is, the other side can do magic too, Prime Minister." The next thing we see in the book is Narcissa and Bellatrix visiting Snape at Spinner's End. In the movie we see this a bit later, but in the book I guess Rowling wanted to get the non-Harry chapters out of the way first. Either way works for me. We see Narcissa heading for one of the houses, clearly in a state of desperation, as Bellatrix tries to catch her and dissuade her from what she's doing. In the book, Bellatrix even kills a fox, thinking it might have been an Auror. They reach Snape's house, and in the book, he has a very interesting reaction. He comes across much friendlier than we've ever seen him throughout the series, and he even smiles. I think there are a couple reasons for this. First of all, he and Narcissa have actually been friends for a while, mainly through Lucius, so in one sense we're seeing a more genuine side to him. But in another sense, it's more of a phony side, as I think this is part of the act he puts on around the Death Eaters. The movie, unfortunately, doesn't show this side of him, as he reacts to them in exactly the same deadpan manner we've seen him throughout the movies. In both versions, however, he's not quite as friendly towards Bellatrix as Narcissa.
Put it down, Bella. We mustn't touch what isn't ours.
And we also see him treating Wormtail, who Voldemort had placed there to assist him, like some sort of servant, making him fetch drinks and in the movie slamming the door in his face. This treatment is likely a means of taking revenge on him for going along with James's bullying all those years at school, as well as, in hindsight, revenge for causing Lily's death. Bellatrix makes her distrust for Snape clear in both versions. In the book, however, she asks him several questions that throw his loyalty into question, and he gives pretty convincing answers to each of them.
"Where were you when the Dark Lord fell? Why did you never make any attempt to find him when he vanished? What have you been doing all these years that you've lived in Dumbledore's pocket?"
He answers these three questions by explaining that Voldemort had ordered him to take up his post at Hogwarts so he could spy on Dumbledore, and that he, like many, thought Voldemort to be finished when he fell, hence why he didn't try to find him. He stayed at Hogwarts afterwards simply to stay out of Azkaban, taking advantage, he says, of Dumbledore's trust in him. Aside from believing Voldemort to be dead, all of this is true. He just fails to mention that he was already spying for Dumbledore when Voldemort asked him to spy for him. I do like the shade he throws at Bellatrix here.
"The Dark Lord is pleased that I never deserted my post. I had 16 years of information on Dumbledore to give him when he returned. A rather more useful welcome back present than endless reminiscences of how unpleasant Azkaban is."
Moving back to Bellatrix's questions.
"Why did you stop the Dark Lord procuring the Philosopher's Stone?"
He answers this by claiming that he thought Quirrell only wanted the stone for himself and wasn't worthy of it. He claims he had no idea he was stealing it for Voldemort. This is a lie. As we learn in his memories in Deathly Hallows, Dumbledore asked him to keep an eye on Quirrell.
Why did you not return at once when the Dark Lord was reborn?
He claims he waited until Dumbledore ordered him to return so that he could continue to spy for Voldemort. While technically true, it wasn't so he could keep spying for Voldemort, it was so that he could keep pretending he was spying for Voldemort while he was actually spying for Dumbledore. His answer to this prompts Bellatrix to ask another question.
But what use have you been? What useful information have we had from you?
Snape claims his information is conveyed directly to Voldemort, but he does mention that it led to the deaths of Emmeline Vance and Sirius Black.
Regarding Vance, we never get a definitive answer as to whether or not he's telling the truth here. I suspect he's simply saying this to make himself look better to Bellatrix, though I suppose it's possible Dumbledore was willing to sacrifice her for the greater good to further cement Snape's place as a spy.
As for Sirius, that's just a straight-up lie. Snape in no way contributed to Sirius's death. Hell, he tried to talk Sirius into staying safely at his house rather than go to the battle.
Where were you a few weeks ago when we battled to retrieve the prophecy for the Dark Lord?
Snape says he was ordered to remain behind so he could keep his cover.
Perhaps you disagree with the Dark Lord. Perhaps you think that Dumbledore would not have noticed if I had joined forces with the Death Eaters to fight the Order of the Phoenix. And, forgive me, you speak of dangers. You were facing 6 teenagers, were you not?
And the final and arguably most important question Bellatrix asks,
And why, Snape, why is Harry Potter still alive when you have had him at your mercy for 5 years?
Snape gives the obvious answer. Murdering Dumbledore's favorite student might just possibly have made him angry. He does go on, however, to say that before Harry arrived at Hogwarts, he, like many, thought it possible that he himself might be a powerful dark wizard who Voldemort's followers could rally around once more.
Of course, it became apparent to me very quickly that he had no extraordinary talent at all. He has fought his way out of a number of tight corners by a simple combination of sheer luck and more talented friends. He is mediocre to the last degree, though as obnoxious and self-satisfied as was his father before him.
He's telling the truth here, or at least what he sees as the truth.
I have done my utmost to have him thrown out of Hogwarts, where I believe he scarcely belongs. But kill him or allow him to be killed in front of me? I would have been a fool to risk it with Dumbledore close at hand.
This is a lie, though, as Snape's real reasons for protecting Harry will be made clear to us in Deathly Hallows. Snape then talks about his relationship with Dumbledore.
You overlook Dumbledore's greatest weakness. He has to believe the best of people. I spun him a tale of deepest remorse when I joined his staff fresh from my Death Eater days, and he embraced me with open arms, though, as I say, never allowing me nearer the dark arts than he could help. I am pleased to say, however, that Dumbledore is growing old. The duel with the Dark Lord last month shook him. He has since sustained a serious injury because his reactions are slower than they once were. But through all these years, he has never stopped trusting Severus Snape, and therein lies my greatest value to the Dark Lord.
While aspects of this are true, like Dumbledore having sustained an injury and to an extent his need to see the best in people, Snape is deliberately playing up Dumbledore's weaknesses and telling it in a way that makes himself look valuable to the Death Eaters. This whole interrogation part of the conversation was cut from the movie, and I can see why. You don't necessarily need to show it, and they had a limited number of minutes to work with. I do enjoy reading it, though. Especially now, knowing Snape's true loyalties, it's fun to go back to this and see how he so convincingly shoots down all of Bellatrix's questions. Questions that Voldemort must have also asked him when he returned to him. Part of what makes him so convincing here is that a decent chunk of what he's saying is actually true. He's simply adding untrue details to them or deliberately leaving things out. As Dot Pixis says in Attack on Titan,
But first, a word of advice about telling a lie. To make it good, you need to mix in at least a pinch of the truth.
So with Bellatrix's interrogation over, Narcissa is finally able to talk to Snape. Apparently her son, Draco, has been tasked with some sort of difficult mission by Voldemort, one that he is highly unlikely to complete and may even die trying. Bellatrix tells her Draco should be proud to have been granted this honor, but Narcissa is convinced that Voldemort is only doing this to punish Lucius for his failures. The mission, as we learn at the end of the book, is to kill Dumbledore, and Narcissa is right. Voldemort is only assigning it to Draco as a means of punishing Lucius. He intends for Snape to do it at the end. A tearful Narcissa begs Snape to do something so that her son will be safe, and while Snape won't try to change Voldemort's mind, he does agree to help Draco so he can succeed in his mission. He is then asked to make the Unbreakable Vow, which he does, promising to watch over and help Draco, and to do the deed himself should Draco fail. A change the movie made here that I don't really like is that Bellatrix is the one to pressure Snape into making the vow, and asks him to swear to all those things. I think it's much more powerful in the book with Narcissa being the one to ask this of him. It's her son that's in danger, after all. Speaking of which, this is our first time truly meeting Narcissa. Yeah, we saw her briefly at the Quidditch World Cup, but this is the first time she actually has lines. We know, based on things Sirius has said, and the fact that she was using Kreacher to help with Voldemort's plans in the last book, that she has blood supremacist views, and is similarly snobbish to her husband and son. So it's interesting that the first time we really get to meet her, we're seeing her not as a faithful follower of Voldemort or a snobby aristocrat, but as a mother terrified for the safety of her son, to the point that she's actually defying Voldemort's orders by discussing Draco's mission with someone who she doesn't even realize already knows about it. It's a good way of making us sympathize with her a bit by showing us her more vulnerable human side first. And I think Helen McCrory does a good job showing all these conflicting emotions through her facial acting. As I've mentioned before, I also like seeing Snape displaying actual care for someone. Despite the fact that he's lying to keep his cover, it does feel like a much more genuine Snape than we've seen so far. Until now, even the people he cares about, he's acted as if he doesn't. It's also interesting to note that Bellatrix, as fanatically devoted to Voldemort as she is, apparently doesn't inform him that Narcissa went behind his back to talk to Snape, possibly suggesting that there is a part of her that loves her sister more than Voldemort. But yeah, as a whole, I think this scene is good, and I don't mind them cutting the whole interrogation section. I do think some of the emotional impact is lost, though, by having Snape act the same as always, and having Bellatrix take control of them making the vow. I love Helena Bonham Carter as Bellatrix, but Helen McCrory is a great actress too, and they really could have given her more lines. Speaking of Helena Bonham Carter, in the book, this scene is all we see of Bellatrix. However, they expanded her role in the movie, adding her to scenes she wasn't involved in the book, and even adding a whole new scenes with her. I do have issues with some of these additions, but I really love Carter's performance, so giving her more screen time is an idea I'm more than fine with.